everybody is well during these very strange times. This is the second installment of the series, Let's Talk About Paris Property. And so tonight, it's nighttime for me anyway, we're going to talk about different types of architecture in Paris. And I just want to say first that my previous assistant, who has since gone on to bigger, greener fields, Kiana, she made a very nice timeline of different eras of architecture in Paris and how they reflected on people's, the way that people lived at that time. And it's a great visual aid. We changed our website, so we'll be reposting that architecture timeline soon, and I will put in a link to it. So let's get started. The first and oldest part of Paris would be the Marais. So these are buildings that are built, 14th century, 13th century, very old. And the Marais literally means marsh. So you can imagine that the ground is not exactly bedrock. In fact, none of Paris is bedrock, and that's a very important thing to know when buying property here. And we can have a whole other discussion about the geology of Paris, which I find fascinating. But it's important because what it means really ultimately is that buildings in Paris move, not just in the Marais, but everywhere. Some less than others. But the Marais is very old. The buildings are smaller. They've got smaller apartments, although over time a lot of the units have been combined, so now there are bigger ones. And usually it's rare to find an elevator because since the buildings were small, the stairwells were small. And if there's any technical feasibility to install an elevator, it would be kind of cutting into the stairwell. And so usually the probability of that being possible is low. However, in the buildings where it has been technically feasible, it's been done because it increases the property value severalfold. So either you wait until a top floor unit with a little balcony and tons of light and an elevator comes on the market, or you accept to walk up those 5 floors. The other thing about architecture in the Marais is that although there are some very smaller buildings with 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, or like I said, modified combined units that are much, much bigger, a lot of them inside have typically exposed beams if the owner has decided to expose them. And so that's the kind of charm that you'd find in an apartment in the Marais. Exposed beams, parquet floors, or tomette. Tomette floors are these sort of hexagonal tiles that are like terracotta. I love them. But you'll also find tomette a lot in maids' rooms. But that's a classic feature of a very old apartment in the Marais: exposed beams, tomette tiles, this sort of terracotta tiles. Sometimes the floors won't be totally flat. Sometimes you walk up the stairs and the stairs are not flat. And this is because these buildings have been settling over the centuries in this sort of sediment that's not very hard. And the Marais is also right on the edge of the Seine. So when the Seine, the river that runs through Paris, when the Seine gets high, sometimes there'll be some humidity problem in the caves. And that is something that is just a recurring maintenance problem, and buildings have to be proactive about it. They have to be checking constantly, every few months, going down into the cave, seeing if there are any cracks, in the foundation. And then it sounds super scary, cracks in the foundation. But if they're minor, they can be dealt with. And that's the difference between a well-run building and a building that's not well-run. If they're checking constantly and doing proper maintenance, it doesn't have to be a big deal. If, on the other hand, the building is full of tenants, the actual owners are never there, they're just collecting their rents, no one's checking the foundation, sometimes that can become a big problem. And it's impossible to say how much it's going to cost to restabilize the foundation. Now, that is something that at Paris Living we always do. If I have a client who is interested in or falls in love with an apartment in the Marais, we would definitely go down and see the cave, which is the basement, even if the apartment doesn't come with one. Insist on seeing it, look through the papers called the dossier on the apartment, and make sure that there haven't been any problems that have been already noted. See, the thing is that if something has been ignored for too long, then what happens is that the building will decide to first have a qualified professional come in. They'll put a sort of tape over the existing cracks, and then they wait until the movement stops. Then they proceed to see what is necessary to reconsolidate the foundation, and there's no saying what that's going to be, what that's going to look like. Cement injections, extra beams, it's impossible for me to calculate how much that's going to cost for the owner of a specific apartment, because it's way too far down the line. So sometimes I've had to tell people, listen, I'm so sorry, but you got to walk away from this because there is a financial risk that I can't assess for you. So that is sometimes difficult, but it's better to know on the first day that there's a problem, there's a serious problem, so that we can emotionally move forward to being open to other properties. It's not something you want to find out when you're about to sign contract. That's the worst. It's honestly heartbreaking. Residential real estate it's emotional, especially Paris for Americans. You don't want to come and buy an apartment here unless you love Paris, so it's an emotional thing. And we want to sort of protect people to the maximum extent possible, and so have the most information up front before we start, imagining having this place and what we're going to do to it, etc. So I've just spoken about the Marais and some typical foundations, typical problems with foundations, but which apply also to other areas of Paris, which, like I said, none of Paris is built on bedrock. And then a lot of the Paris is a valley, the river's in the middle. And so in Montmartre, and then in the 19th, the Bout de Chaumont, in the 20th, and then down in the south in the 15th, there's some old mines where gypsum was mined, and so there are these big caverns, underground caverns, that have been filled in with like kind of rubble, but there's still movement there, and that can be a little bit more dramatic, actually. So I am going to continue in part 2 of this episode about Paris architecture. So, and talk about the Haussmannian type of architecture, Art Nouveau and Art Deco. See you in a second.